Well, good afternoon once again. It's my great pleasure to introduce your keynote speaker, Diane Lim. Diane Lim brings over 40 years of experience as an economist specializing in the distributional effects of public policies. Before recently retiring from federal service, her last role was the director of the Equity Hub at the U.S. Treasury Department. And prior to that, she was policy director of the House Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness in Growth. She has held many other prominent roles in the federal government, nonprofit, and academic sectors, including serving as chief economist for multiple congressional committees and as a senior economist at the President's Council of Economic Advisors. A former professor and dedicated thought leader, Diane is a founding advisory board member of the University of Virginia's Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy and a past president of the National Tax Association. Her Economist Mom blog earned a top 10 economics blog honor from the Wall Street Journal in 2009. Diane currently serves on the board of Shelter House, a northern VA nonprofit combating homelessness and domestic violence. Please join me in welcoming Diane.
Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction. Thank you to the Northwest Public Employees Diversity Conference and all you attendees, and especially the Planning Committee for inviting me here. I love Portland, I love Seattle, I love Oregon and Washington, and every time I come here I feel like these are my peeps. This is my place, because, to hear that this conference has been going on for over 30 years and has diversity in its title, I realize that you're almost 30 years ahead of everyone else in this country. So that's very impressive. And so I encourage you to keep working on this issue and working for a better world for all of society. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you. But, I didn't grow up here, even though I feel very at home here. I was born and raised in the Midwest, and this is a picture of me in my first grade class in Wilmette, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. And you can probably pick me out in here, in this photo. I have a little question, when people first see me or saw me as a child, even as a young child, and then throughout the rest of my life growing up and when I became an adult and moved to the East Coast, I would get this question in green all the time. They'd see me and they'd ask me, "Where are you from?" And I'd always be so taken by that. It's like, why is that the first thing that you want to ask me? And my whole childhood, because I'm a first-generation American, the oldest child of immigrant parents who came from Asia, from two different countries in Asia, so their common language was English. There was only English spoken in my household, and yet the first day of kindergarten, I realized that the kids in my school in Illinois were kind of laughing at me because they said that I was speaking like I was a foreigner. Like, apparently the English that I learned was English with an Asian accent, even though the only language my parents had in common was English. So from the first day I started school, and then my parents moved from the Chicago suburbs to the Detroit suburbs. And if I thought it was difficult being the child of Asian immigrant parents in the suburb of Chicago, it was way more difficult in the suburbs of Detroit, because I moved there in 1969. I moved there. For some reason, my dad thought it would be a great idea to move me in the middle of a school year. And for some reason, it was a great idea for me to be the first minority student enrolled in the public school system in Farmington, Michigan, which used to be a rural town, but by 1969 had become a suburb Like, it eventually changed from Farmington Township to Farmington Hills, Michigan. And, you know, to be honest, it was whiter than Wilmette, Illinois was, and a lot of the people that lived there were escaping Detroit. So there was white flight out to the suburbs, and they were kind of angry. Like, when I started school in second grade, March of second grade, I walked in, sat at my seat, and one of the first things that happened to me was the boy that was sitting in front of me in these rows of desks turns around with his back to the teacher and starts going like this to me and parroting, like going ching, ching, chong, chong, chong. Okay, so that was second grade. And the teacher didn't notice, and I was just like so petrified. And what did I do? Did I try to tell on this kid? No, I threw up on my desk. And so this moment, these moments have defined me. And unfortunately, I grew up in the suburbs in the Midwest feeling embarrassed that I looked different, that I had parents that were not born in the U.S., and as a coping mechanism, I just tried to fit in any way I could. You know, I was trying my best. I was trying to curl my hair, and at night I'd try to make my eyes bigger. I'd try to stretch my eyeballs, and, you know, all this stuff that in retrospect, I'm so sad that I ever made my parents feel bad about bringing me, you know, raising me in the Midwest and bringing me into the world and having me be the first in the family to actually deal with American society and people that aren't used to seeing people who look different. And but it shaped my life. I got better over time at not getting upset when people said, "Where are you from?" And I would say, "Oh," you know, when I was like a teenager, "You mean where are my parents from?" You know, and I would say, "Yeah, my parents immigrated from Korea and the Philippines, but I was born and raised here. I was born in Chicago, that's where I'm from." And so I think that this is like, as I grew up, I decided to do a lot of things that normally a lot of white people do these things. Like, I studied at University of Michigan undergrad. I became an economist. I became very interested in working on economic policy, but I became very interested in working on policy that would actually benefit everyone. And I was very cognizant of the fact that economists aren't always taught, or are not taught, to really look at how the economy works from a person-level perspective. So I'm here to talk about diversity because this is a diversity conference. I'm here to talk a little bit about why an economist might care about diversity, because I'm not an HR person. I care about diversity because I care about understanding more about what affects economic well-being for everyone. And so diversity work, in my mind, asks this question, especially I'm talking about this from an economist standpoint. The question that we try to answer by looking at economic data or evidence from a more disaggregated perspective, to look at subgroups of the population in terms of demographic categories, what are called intersections. So I stand at the intersection of, like, think of a spreadsheet with rows and columns, and the rows can be different races, and the columns can be gender or geography, or, you know, so I stand at the intersection of female and Asian American, and grew up in the Midwest, and highly educated, which I am, and high income, married. You know, there are all these different intersections, mother, pet parent. You know, there are all these different intersections that I stand in, and the value of trying to look at what makes me in my intersection interesting to study is because if I were to just narrow my table and zero in on the column and the row that is Asian female, I might learn something about what makes Asian females, in general, on average, different from white females or Asian men, right, or the population as a whole. And why might that be valuable? Not because that would show or prove that Asian women are different from all other people, but might show us about what circumstances lead to Asian women on average looking different from white women on average, or from black men on average, or any other intersection of a data table. And so then the next question is, what circumstances and experiences seem to be overrepresented in this intersection? And what can we learn from that? It's not that we will find that difference and say, aha, Asian women are different. It's that we find that difference and say, aha, maybe Asian women are more likely to be married to Asian or white men. Maybe they're more likely to both be highly educated, working, and mothers. And maybe there's something with all those things that they're more likely to be on average that actually gives us insight to the white woman who is working and also has young children, or the black man who's working and also has young children and struggles to make that, to juggle those roles. So this is how I always approached economics, and I realized that economists are not experts on diversity in the economy. And it starts with Adam Smith, who is known as the father of economics, who is not a very representative person compared to American society right now. He was a rich white guy, and economics was born out of Adam Smith's theory of the invisible hand, saying that, everyone can act selfishly and just pursue their own self-interest in the market economy. And the beauty of the market economy is the market forces will signal what society values more than other things. So something very valuable will have high demand. It will command a high price. Something that's not very valuable will be valued very, very, very lowly in terms of market value. And resources will then flow to those things and services that are in high demand and flow away from those things that are in low demand. And similarly, supply matters. So it's all about supply and demand. When things are scarce and in high demand, they'll become very precious. When things are plentiful and in low demand, they'll be worthless, right? So it's this theory of supply and demand, and the fact that, back in Adam Smith's time and in the early days of economics as a discipline, the empirical evidence was limited to very aggregate data because we didn't have computer technology. So we didn't have the capacity to really study data points on every single person in the economy. We only could study the sum of all of that economic activity. So we were not trained to be experts in theory or in empirical practice about diversity and looking at people one at a time. And who becomes an economist? Well, our profession is pretty behind every other profession. It's very well known that PhD economists are very much dominated by white men because it turns out it's expensive to go to school and study to get a PhD in economics. It turns out that to get a good job in economics, you have to have a PhD from not just any school, but an elite school, right, to get a good job in economics and to work in public policy. And so there's little diversity among the most elite of the economists in our profession who get to work on these big issues of how do we design economic policy to work for all. They didn't come from a background where they faced a lot of disadvantage. They don't look in the data for people like them the way that I might have had the curiosity to look for at least Asian women, in the data. So there's little lived experience to motivate an examination of economic disparity and lack of opportunity. PhD economics programs are evolving in the sense that the profession is trying to get more women and more people of color into the profession, but they are not keeping up. This is a book I highly recommend. It's very light reading. It's written by a Swedish journalist whose name is Katrine Marsal. Actually, I think she has a different last name now because of perhaps a divorce, but there was a marital change, so either marriage or divorce, and she now has a different last name that I can't remember, but is Greek. And she wrote this book called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner to just tell the story that Adam Smith was the father of economics, but he didn't really understand how the economy relied on so many women behind the scenes. Behind every successful economist is probably a wife that is cooking dinner for him. Except in Adam Smith's case, who cooked Adam Smith's dinner was his mother, because he never married. And then when his mother passed away, it was his cousin, his female cousin, who he brought in to take care of him. So I want to tell you a little bit about an old version of supply-side economics. In the 1980s, which is when I was in graduate school, supply-side economics was built on this notion that if you want to create economic value and growth in the economy, you need to start at the top of the income and the wealth distribution. Because economists were studying GDP, which is an aggregate measure of the economy, gross domestic product, and if you look at the connection between GDP and different economic policies and try to run a regression that says GDP against these policy variables, you will easily come to the conclusion, based on historical GDP data, that the best way to grow the economy is to keep giving more money to those who are already doing the best in our society, right? Because it's based on past data. And so there's a legacy of past exclusion and discrimination in the economy that leads to this idea that we need more resources given to those people who are already doing the best. It just compounds the inequities, the disparities that have always existed in the market economy. This is a totally different view from Heather McGhee. Wrote this book that I found totally inspiring, and she gave actually a keynote at the last conference in Portland that I spoke at, the Partners in Diversity Conference. And Heather wrote this book that's called The Sum of Us, which is to say that we as an economy and society are only as well off as not the worst off individual, but the totality, the sum of our collective well-being. And she stressed that, economists and economic policymakers are not good at recognizing that our collective economic potential is not well represented by just the top of the income distribution. And so Heather's thesis actually inspired President Biden's Day One executive order on racial equity in underserved communities, that the federal government's goal in advancing equity is to provide everyone, so I'm emphasizing here, with the opportunity to reach their full potential. President Biden's executive order is the one that actually created my office at Treasury, called the Equity Hub. Janet Yellen was the Secretary of the Treasury during the Biden administration, and she would talk about this new concept. She says, I'm going to talk about modern supply-side economics, which recognizes that the whole of our economic well-being is greater than the sum of our parts. So it's recognizing that we rely on each other to ensure our economic success. And nobody's economic success is due just to their own hard work and luck. It's, you're standing and leaning on so many different other people that are supporting your work, your child care provider, right? Your children or your parents, family and community. There's so much interdependence that creates this economic infrastructure that helps us all prosper. And so Secretary Yellen was asking, how can we as a society invest in people and try to level the playing field, the economic playing field, to better live up to our collective potential? It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. That's the misunderstanding among a lot of policymakers, even sometimes economists and the general public, that when you're talking about making some people that have had a lack of opportunity better off, have more opportunity, open more doors, it doesn't mean we have to take away from someone else to do that, because these are people that have not been living up to their potential. Rather than, if everyone were living up to their potential, it would be true that in order to make some people better off, we'd have to take something away from other people. But not when people are living and operating in the economy below their full economic potential, below what they want to do. Economists have not made, Secretary Yellen, when I started at Treasury, she said, I hope you can help me make the empirical case for my new theory of modern supply-side economics. I wasn't able to do that mostly because my work was cut short and everything in the federal government takes a long time. I was only in the job for a year and a half before the Trump administration came in, and my job was eliminated the first day of his administration with the executive order, and the third day I was put on administrative leave and never set foot in Treasury ever again. The economists haven't been able to make the empirical case because the categorization by demographics, by these intersections of socioeconomic demographic characteristics, tends to lead to an overgeneralization of differences across categories. And the trouble with creating tables that show anything you want economic by race is that it oversimplifies and it tends to emphasize the differences across those rows or columns rather than what we can do to reduce those, and rather than what is in common, what are the circumstances that lead to those differences. So the emphasis on those differences and going right to, okay, how can we reduce these differences across races, leads to this assumption that we're talking about redistribution. And that's bad, because we don't need any more polarization and partisanship in this country, and we don't need everyone to think that if we're lifting up one person, we must be cutting down another. And so instead, what economists need to help all of us do is to kind of dwell in the pause, which means you find differences across race or gender or geography, and you try to understand what circumstances are overrepresented in that category, and therefore what we may have in common with people outside our intersection on the demographic characteristics table. And so the purpose of my work on Asian women, I started it during the pandemic when a lot of women were losing their paid work opportunities because guess what? All the kids were having to stay at home and take school from home. And so a lot of women dropped out of the labor force during the pandemic, in the early part of the pandemic. And yet I wanted to see that. I knew that it would affect Asian women disproportionately because Asian women, it turns out, more than any other demographic category, combines full-time work with also being primary caregivers at home. And so I looked for the BLS data. It turned out the BLS monthly report did not produce statistics on Asian women, but only Asians as a whole, even though BLS was producing Black men versus Black women, Hispanic men versus Hispanic women, white men versus white women. And then Asians, they said, here's all the Asians because we don't have a big enough sample size to have statistically reliable comparisons of Asian men to Asian women. So that's what led me to look at this intersectional analysis. I kind of put out my own analysis of the data to show what was going on with Asian women, and then when Speaker Nancy Pelosi formed a new select committee called the House Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth, Chairman Jim Himes, in the picture with me, he's a moderate Democrat from Connecticut, and Pelosi appointed a bunch of other Democratic members that turned out to be all women and people of color, and including Pramila Jayapal, who's not in this picture, but it was a bipartisan committee that included men. and Republicans, sorry, included, bipartisan, including Republicans. It's a little slip, including Republicans, totally inadvertent slip. I'm trying to stick to the words on the slides as best as I can. And so the House Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth, which is a mouthful, I learned some lessons working there as the policy director for the Democrats. And that was that I was hired because they thought Chairman Himes thought I would be good at working across the aisle on a bipartisan basis, because I came from a background of emphasizing fiscal responsibility, on a bipartisan basis. But it was really challenging when you work for a committee that has this title. In fact, the Republicans decided to rename it on their website. And anything they put out, they called it the House Select Committee on the Economy, because they didn't like the word disparity, and they didn't like the word fairness. And not that they wanted things to be unfair, but they would say to me, that makes it sound like you're saying that the economy is unfair. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of am. And, I think, yeah. And so the disparity, they don't like words. So I found out that they don't like words that sound negative, okay? So they don't like negative sounding words, right? So they wanted to, if I wanted to talk to any of their staff, I needed to use things like, I need to be explicit and say, what do we mean by economic disparity? Well, we mean kind of legacy. There's a legacy of bias that has prevented everyone in the economy from having the same opportunity. And so we're talking not about equalizing outcomes as much as let's start by opening up more doors for people, more paths to economic success. And so I could use the word opportunity, and that was more palatable from the Republican standpoint. And often that led to conversations where we would agree on what could be done in terms of federal policy that wasn't thought of as too liberal or too conservative. We had expert witnesses, but I would notice that every time that the Republicans and the Democrats called expert witnesses, those witnesses were automatically targets of attack for the other side, right? Because if you're testifying for the Democrats, you must not like Republicans, and Republicans must not like you, and you must not be trustworthy. And so there would be attacks on the witnesses, but we made the innovative idea of let's bring some real people into our hearings. Let's start our hearings with a video of some real person, one real person that the Democrats would pick and one real person that the Republicans would pick, who would discuss their own experience with economic disparity or the economy, right? And we wouldn't say whose real person was which side's real person. And no Republican or Democratic member ever attacked the credibility of this real person when we played those videos. So we tried. In the end, we were not able to have a bipartisan report because it turned out that all those words really mattered, so it was really painful to have to agree on language. But our successes were, we had a lot of field hearings where we traveled the country and we got to meet and hear from real people. We were in Seattle for one of our field hearings. We were in Lorain, Ohio, a former manufacturing steel town. We were in Texas, where a hearing that was supposed to be focused on infrastructure investment got hijacked and turned out to be about border security and fentanyl. So there were these experiences where there was good things and there were some bad things because of that partisan dynamic between our Republican and Democratic members. We produced a committee report that was more like a collated thing, more like what lots of bipartisan commissions put together, which is it's like you have the majority view and then you have a dissenting views chapter, and that's what it ended up becoming, even though we didn't want it to be that way. And finally, I wanted to show you just the first few minutes, the intro to a documentary. Not yet, Mark, hold on. The documentary that we produced, a 30-minute documentary, was produced by the committee. We used committee budget and some private donations to fund, we hired a producer We actually fully funded within the committee budget and some donations the production of this 30-minute documentary. And, granted, we had some politicians help, a politician named Nancy Pelosi, who turns out has really good connections in Hollywood. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? So we produced this documentary, and I just want to show the first, it's like less than 3 minutes. So Mark, take it away.
These days, when we turn on the news, it feels like we're living through one of the most polarizing times in our history. And one of our problems is that the American dream is out of reach for too many people.
In the wealthiest country in the world, most people are struggling economically, in one way or another.
I'm Sarah Jessica Parker. Almost everyone has a story of economic challenges and hurdles. I know what that's like. Growing up, even though my parents worked very hard, my family sometimes couldn't pay the bills.
People are trying to move up. People want to be able to chart their own course. And often we see things get in the way of that.
Democrats and Republicans in Congress came together to study and propose solutions to our growing economic divide.
I think that you have a lot of members up here who passionately 100% care about that, on both sides of the aisle.
And that meant listening to Americans where they live all over the country.
It's so clear to me that no one makes it on their own. No one does it alone.
The cooks, whose time is consumed by caregiving.
I met the boys. I didn't see special needs. They instantly became my family.
Alicia Villanueva, who found passion in sharing her culture's riches.
I was thinking how I can contribute to this country, so I decided to introduce my culture through my Mexican cuisine.
And Joseph William Graham Jr., still ambitious in the face of injustice, inequity, and hardship.
I'm on a college campus encouraging young people to get a degree that I don't have.
We are all different, but we all know what it's like to strive for something.
It's not even just about an exercise of empathy, but it's an exercise in understanding how we are all connected.
Regardless of what party you are, regardless of where you come from, we all have grit, and there's a way to tap into it.
Here are 3 stories that capture the ambition, hunger, passion, and love that define resilience.
Okay, so that's just the opening. And I encourage you, it's on YouTube, it's public access, it's free, 30 minutes, and you'll hear the stories of those 3 families. And it was kind of a culmination of our recognition in the committee that this is the way to build collegiality and to build kind of a shared purpose, even with the partisanship that goes on, is to keep bringing it back to real person stories. I then went to the Treasury Equity Hub because Speaker Pelosi's reign ended. And so then President Biden had created this executive order. Secretary Yellen said, I want to build an office that's a policy-focused office, permanent policy office with career professionals, not just political appointees at the Treasury Department. And I want to create this office called the Equity Hub. It was the first permanent office that was created across the federal executive branch in response to the President Biden executive order. And we were starting to have some successes. The middle photo is we had the first ever Treasury Asian American Economic Summit. There had been lots of other demographic categories economic summits, but I got going an Asian American Summit, which is, you know, when there are racial kind of observances, when there are racial affinity groups, often Asians are not, we're a little bit further down the list of priority groups. And we were starting to work on issue briefs and blogs and focused on different underrepresented groups, such as LGBTQ, such as rural economic development groups, and small businesses, minority small businesses. But our lessons were cut short. The early emphasis of our office, even though we were called the Equity Hub and not the Racial Equity Hub, is we ended up getting labeled as a DEI racial equity focused office, which was just our first, like the first dimension that we were focusing on. But ironically, that focus and labeling of our office as a racial equity DEI office actually generated more divisiveness and political polarization, even from within the Democrats that were on our advisory committee. So we had some successes, but unfortunately there was a big focus on data collection by race, which, because the IRS does not collect data by race. When you file a tax return, the IRS doesn't know what race you are. They don't even know what gender you are, if you think about what you put down on the 1040. So, I mean, you can find out because your social security number's there and we can find out, but there is this concern that you don't want to collect data by race on the 1040. And so, but there's a big push from the research community, the economics research community, that we need data collected by race. We need to try to impute race. We need to try to impute tax data to demographic census data. And that kind of relentless focus on data collection by race actually made it seem like, because we kept talking about data on black taxpayers, data on white taxpayers, as if it's black versus white taxpayers. So that was my complaint about my year and a half working at Treasury, was I wish people would stop talking about race so much, because that is kind of missing the main purpose of studying diversity and equity in the economy. The Equity Hub was explicitly mentioned in Project 2025, so I guess it shouldn't have been a shock to me that my office was shut down the first day of the Trump administration, and that our office, all the employees in my office were RIF'd, reduction in force, in April. But I'm hopeful that DEI work, which is the work that I've been trying to talk about, is essential to effective economic policy making. Seeing and understanding what maximizes the well-being of the sum of us, and not just some of us, is important, and we need to bring more personal stories into economic analysis. Economists need to work alongside journalists and other social science disciplines and not let AI replace our profession, which it cannot replace our profession if we're doing our job right and talking to people one at a time, which is a skill that we in economics do not work on training people as. And so I'm hoping that my past work and research strategy can inspire young economists to work on this as well, to work with journalists, to work with sociologists and anthropologists, to talk to people, one or a few people at a time, and to conduct surveys to detect the prevalence of circumstances and also what is common across our demographic categories. And this is evidence that would engage the broader public. You'd much rather watch a documentary with Sarah Jessica Parker than read an economics article that has lots of distributional tables in it. And it makes you watch that, and you don't know, by the way, who on that video was actually a Trump supporter versus a Biden supporter. You know, you don't know unless you're imposing stereotypes or generalizations. And so that's what's great about real people, is that usually the first thing you ask a real person is not, what party are you from, right? You talk about, oh, do you have kids that go to this school too? And so it's like grabbing that, what makes us have things in common rather than emphasizing the things that are different from us. So I will conclude with I am Asian, I'm American, and I'm human, and I am an intersectional economist, which is a label that the conservative media first latched onto when I was first named as the director of the Equity Hub at Treasury. They said, oh, she is a self-professed intersectional economist. You know that sounds bad. What the heck does that mean? So anyway, thank you so much.
All right, let's give Diane another round of applause. I feel smarter. I don't know about you guys, but I feel much smarter. I'd now like to welcome to the lectern Victoria Cross for the Robert Phillips Regional Diversity Award.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Cross, and I'm with Multnomah County. And I'm part of the, thank you, Deborah. Thank you. And I'm part of the award committee. It's always a pleasure to serve on the Robert Phillips Award Committee as long as I have, because it's truly a labor of love. We get to learn about your incredible and inspiring work that our colleagues, you, doing within your organizations and in the community. It's a joy to recognize this work. Each year, Northwest Public Employees Diversity Conference solicits nominations from our sponsoring jurisdictions to honor an employee, a work group, a team, or department that has demonstrated a sustained commitment to diversity that goes beyond their day-to-day job requirements. The award is named after the conference's founder, Robert Phillips, so it's 32 years ago. And Robert, I believe, was a first recipient for this award. And I can say I'm very proud that I can call Robert Phillips my mentor. The award embraces the spirit by which Mr. Phillips poured out so much for the cause of creating a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable workplace in the region. Now, I would like to welcome to the stage AFSCME Executive Director, Joe Basler. Yeah. Please, please, please. That's very welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please.
So glad I didn't wipe off the stage. That would have made Percy very upset with me. I'm Joe Basler. I'm Executive Director of Percy's Union, AFSCME. Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here to frankly honor Percy. I've worked at AFSCME for not quite 20 years, but really close. And Percy has always been a sort of a guiding force within our union for thoughtful and kind leadership. He has sort of embodied the idea that we can disagree but not be disagreeable. He's always sort of welcomed opposing ideas to the table to discuss them. And as long as they want to come to a solution, he's always been there. Like, don't get me wrong, I've seen Percy get really mad. Rarely has it been at me, thank God, because don't mess with Percy. But the only way I've ever seen him really get mad is when people don't want to come with solutions, right? They just want to fight. Because when Percy wants to fight, he wants to fight to figure out what's best for all of us and how we can come together. He has changed our union so much. He actually, because of his work, we, in the last couple of years, created a diversity and equity officer. It's the first in the nation of the 2 million people who work are AFSCME members. We're the first state in the country to have this position. It is elected council-wide, and it's going to be sure that his strength and his vision will last within our organization for years and years and years to come. So, like I said, it has been such a huge honor working with Percy all these years, and he will be, he's retiring soon, and it is very upsetting. Now, I mean, it's good for him, because he's going to go have a wonderful time, as he says, chasing chickens, but it breaks my heart a little bit. So, but his influence will be remembered within our organization for hopefully longer than mine will. So I really appreciate it, and I just want to thank you so much, Percy.
At this time, could former Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafori come up to the stage? Please continue.
Good afternoon. Okay, guys, we can do better than that. Good afternoon. That's what I'm talking about. It is so wonderful to be here today to celebrate one of my favorite people in the entire world, Percy Winters Jr. My mother always used to say that it's surprising how much you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. And while I'm not sure that Percy ever said those words out of his mouth, he very definitely lived that value, at least as long as I've known him. He has walked that talk. It doesn't matter what work he's doing it as a team. And he's doing it as a team, and he's letting everyone else get the credit for it. He'll be the guy conducting the operations, but you know he will let other people get the credit. And one of the things about him that's so amazing is that he does it so strategically. You might think he's just this lovable, affable guy who's always got a big grin on his face, but he's smart as heck. And he's going through the process to figure out, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this done in a way that makes everyone feel like they are invested in the outcome? I had the pleasure, and I do mean pleasure, of working with him during one of the most difficult times that our country has ever faced, and that was COVID. Now, I was chair of the organization, therefore management, and he was president of the union. In today's world, that would mean that we would be polar opposites and we would be fighting about every issue. But that wasn't how we worked together. We worked together as a team, and that meant spending long hours on the phone. I'd call Percy on the telephone as I'd be out walking in the pouring rain, and he would tell me I was crazy. And we would talk through the issues. We needed to move really quickly. We needed to change the way that we did business at Multnomah County, and that meant changing the lives of our employees. There was some tough, tough times. But we got through it. We got through it together. We got through it with grit and with grace, and we got through it because we were a team. And I only wish that today more people could look at leaders like Percy and say, I want to be like that guy. Because in the words of his children, who I am so lucky to sit with at the table, Percy is a superhero.
Okay, Wendy Wilcox, conference co-chair. From the past, we invite you up to say some words.
Oh, good afternoon. I am so honored and humbled to be here today to celebrate Percy. From 2008 to 2023, I had the immense pleasure and privilege of serving alongside Percy Winters Jr. on the Northwest Public Employees Diversity Committee. From the very first year, Percy made me feel welcomed, included, and valued. And that spirit of inclusion is the hallmark of his leadership. I think it was around my third or fourth year on the committee when Robert Phillips and Percy approached me with the incredible opportunity to serve with Percy as co-chair of the conference. I was terrified, but it was truly an honor to be mentored and work beside Percy. His passion for this conference has always been unmistakable. He's poured out countless hours into making it the best it can be year after year. Percy's mentor, the late Robert Phillips, the founder of this very conference, is surely looking down with pride. Percy has carried forward Robert's legacy with unwavering dedication, always championing inclusivity and ensuring that every voice on the committee is heard. He reminds us constantly how vital that is. In the early years, Percy personally coordinated the volunteers, organizing the volunteer training luncheons and encouraging us committee members to show up to express our thanks and to remind them how important they are to the success of this conference. He brought the same care and attention to each executive session, ensuring their session plannings received the proper attention and made sure to include feedback from past years, always working to do better. And to the broader programming, making sure it was inclusive and meaningful for all attendees at every level. He's especially known amongst committee members for his stewardship of the conference budget. We always knew we had to be prepared to talk to Percy if we were planning on adding anything new. One of Percy's greatest gifts is his ability to mentor others, to help them rise to new heights of leadership and to celebrate them when they do. He is the backbone of this conference. Honestly, it's hard to imagine it without him. But knowing Percy, he's already mentoring the next backbone, which I actually got confirmation of today. Because he wants this conference to thrive long after he steps out of the spotlight, and he's perfectly fine not being the center of attention. But guess what, Percy? Today, you are the center of our attention. Everyone, please rise and join me in welcoming Percy Jr. to the stage as we honor him with the 2025 Robert Phillips Regional Diversity Award.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Wow. This is bittersweet. There are a few people that I would like to thank. First, giving honor to God, because if it wasn't for His mercy, I would not be here today. Thank you. I would like to thank my manager, Jamel Rose. Jamel has always supported me in this role. It makes my job here a lot easier when you have your manager's support. I would like to thank my ASHME family. You all gave me an opportunity to be a leader within your organization, and I truly appreciate that. I would like to thank Kevin Kittamura. Kevin has been the graphic designer for the conference for many years. Each year that I have called upon him, he has always answered. Thank you, Kevin. I would like to thank the committee members, both past and present. I learned a lot from you all, and you all made me into a better chair of this conference every year. I would like to thank my children for being here today. This means a lot to me. I appreciate you, and I love you. Lastly, and definitely not least, I want to thank Carolyn Lee, our conference coordinator. Carolyn has worked with me since 2006. We have developed an outstanding professional and personal relationship. Carolyn, I would not be who I am or where I am without your unwavering support. Thank you. I know that I may have forgotten some people. For that, I do apologize. Wow, what a journey. It is with deep gratitude that I stand before you today, humbled to receive the Robert Phillips Regional Diversity Award. Now, many of you know him as Robert Phillips, but I know him as Pops, and you will hear me refer to him as Pops throughout my speech. Pops was more than a leader, he was a trailblazer. His work in affirmative action and equal opportunity created real pathways for fairness and respect in our workplaces and communities. For me, Robert was an example of how one person's vision and persistence can ripple outward to transform entire institutions. His courage and dedication inspired me in my own work at Multnomah County and in my commitment to this conference. And I can't help but imagine what Pop might say if he was standing here with us today. I think he would remind us that progress doesn't happen by accident. It happens when ordinary people commit themselves to extraordinary goals and when we choose unity over division. When I joined this thank you. Go ahead, give it up. When I joined this committee in 2001, I never imagined we could come this far. Back then, we were just a few hundred people gathered with the hopes of sparking change. And now, here we are today, nearly 2,000 participants strong. We may not have enough money, the right workshop presenters, or even the most dynamic speaker, but we've always had purpose. And purpose will carry you further than any of those other things. Our evolution tells its own story. We began as a diversity conference, then came diversity and equity. Today, we proudly say diversity, equity, and inclusion. That journey reflects the truth that progress demands constant growth, expanding the table, widening the circle, and refusing to let anyone be left out. But as we celebrate, we must also remember the challenges of racism and divisions are not new. We've seen them before, from the Little Rock Nine facing down the Arkansas Governor's National Guard, to Governor George Wallace declaring segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. To the sanitation workers in Memphis marching with signs that read, "I am a man." Each of those moments reminds us that progress has always faced resistance. And yet, each time, unity and courage carried the day. Now let me take a minute and ask that you let this set in. As a man, as a black man, these men had to walk around with signs saying they were men. Today, we hear echoes of those same tactics from the highest office in our land. The names and faces are different, but the playbook is the same. Divide, scapegoat, and diminish. And yes, I am talking about that knucklehead back in Washington, D.C. But so is our response. We stand together. As I step down as co-chair of this conference, I do so with pride in what we have accomplished and in faith what you will continue to build. This conference was never about me. It has always been about us. Across jurisdictions, across organizations, across every line that others would use to divide us, we choose to lean on one another. That unity is our power. That unity is how we honor Robert Phillips, the Little Rock Nine, the sanitation workers, and every person who has stood against injustice with courage and hope. So let us carry this work forward in diversity, and in equity, inclusion, and above all, in unity. Thank you very much.